Good afternoon, I'm Dennis Galucki. Welcome to the 463rd Imagine Greater Buffalo program and 85th virtual Imagine lecture, hosted by our wonderful Buffalo and Erie County Public Library. Thanks so much for joining us today. This program is created by the Center for the Study of Art, Architecture, History, and Nature, and ImagineLifelongLearning.com. Now, we're going to start with our speakers shortly, but first a little housekeeping. Everyone watching will be muted during our speakers presentation, so if you have a question, please type it into the chat box and we'll get to as many as we can. This program is being recorded, so you'll be able to watch it again later on the Downtown Central Library's Facebook page and YouTube channel. And we hope you share the link with your friends and networks. This is the fourth Tuesday of the month. So the fourth leg of C-SAAHN is nature and science. And as such, it's also a preview today of our Buffalo Day celebration coming up, quickly here on July 5th, Tuesday, July 5th. Our speaker today will be one of the panelists at Chautauqua. We'll get into that a little bit later, but for now, let's introduce our speaker. It's Adam Rome. Adam is an expert on the history of our relationship with the environment. He has written about suburban sprawl and the rise of the environmental movement, the first Earth Day, and efforts to green business. He has also written and narrated a 3-hour Audible original course on the enduring genius of Frederick Law Olmsted, which Audible, a division of Amazon, released last month to mark Olmsted's 200th birthday. Adam is a professor of environment and sustainability at the University at Buffalo. So now, pleased to welcome Adam Rome, and he will discuss Olmsted and Buffalo's future. Adam, take it away.
Thank you so much, Dennis, and thanks to the Buffalo and Erie County Library, which Olmsted would have been a great fan of if he were around to say that today. When I was thinking about what to say, I'm not sure what I would have said if this event had been 2 weeks ago. But after the shooting on the 14th, the next day I felt an overpowering urge to go to Delaware Park, which is behind me. I live only a few blocks away. And in fact, I had been there on that Saturday earlier in the day, but I felt the need to go back. And part of that was I really wanted to stand by the statue of the young Lincoln near the Rose Garden. Even now, I'm not exactly sure why I had this overpowering need to be near Lincoln. I think because he was a great leader in a harrowing time. And he also was crucial in the beginning of our reckoning with the evil of slavery, a reckoning which is still going on today, unfortunately. But I also really wanted to spend time in the park itself. And I've done that hundreds and hundreds of times since moving to Buffalo 6 years ago. But it was especially important to me on that day to see the people in the park and the incredible variety and diversity of people in the park. And that's always heartening to me. And the park was full of people. It was beautiful weather. They were doing all kinds of things. Parents with kids at the playground, people fishing in Hoyt Lake. Of course, people just getting exercise, people reading, people staring at the beauty. I myself saw a great heron fly across the lake. And as I say, part of what's amazing about Delaware Park to me is how many different kinds of people you can see. And immigrant families, especially. You see all kinds of amazingly diverse weddings in the Rose Garden. On that day, I took particular note of how many interracial couples I saw. And for me, this was solace. This was a sense that we can be a community, that we can overcome all the things that divide us. And that thought, amazingly, it was by design. Olmsted intended for people long after he died to be able to go to his parks, not just in Buffalo, but around the country, and to feel part of a community. He talked about the harmonizing influence of parks. And of course, parks can only do so much, but for Olmsted, they were a force for social reform, for community betterment, and for building community. They weren't just amenities, which is how we often think of them today. Even Olmsted's partner in designing the Buffalo parks and many others looked at them mainly as works of civic art. But for Olmsted, they were forces of social reform. And in order to understand that, you have to know more about Olmsted's life. And that's really the focus of my audible, not his landscape architecture, but the extraordinary life that he led. He was a titan of the 19th century. He was intensely engaged with all the great issues of his time. And most people, I think, even now, don't really appreciate that. That he was part of every great transformation of one of the most transformative periods in American history. He traveled incognito in the South before the Civil War in the 1850s as a correspondent for the newly established New York Times. And his reports built support for the abolition of slavery. Then he helped the North win the Civil War by leading the U.S. Sanitary Commission, which helped to protect and succor Union troops. After the gold rush started California on the path to wealth and power, he headed west to manage a vast mining estate there. Early in his life, when the nation was overwhelmingly rural, Olmsted was a farmer, a scientific farmer in the language of the day, dedicating to improving agriculture. And then in the second half of the 19th century, when the most dynamic force in American society was the metropolis, home to both astonishing wealth and squalor, Olmsted worked to make cities more livable. And he wasn't just actively engaged in these events, but he was also a deep thinker about hugely important questions then and now. And in my audible course, I focused on 4. They each get one 30-minute lecture. Olmsted thought again and again about what can create community, what enables cities to thrive, what kind of relationship to the environment is most satisfying and sustainable, and what is the role of government in providing for the common good. All 4 of those questions he thought about both before he became famous as a landscape architecture and afterward. In fact, they shaped a great deal of what he did as a landscape architect. And I should say, just for those of you who don't know the biography, Olmsted was born in 1822 in Hartford, Connecticut, and he continued to work actively until 1895, when he began to have dementia, lost his memory, and retired. And then he lived until 1903. So he spanned almost all of the 19th century. Central Park, his most famous accomplishment, began in 1857. But he didn't really begin to focus on landscape architecture until after the Civil War, and the parks that he built with Vaux's help in Buffalo were among the first signs that he was going to be the greatest landscape architect of the 19th century and maybe of all time. But he was famous even before he became famous as a landscape architect. as a writer, as a social reformer, as a pioneer in management. The question that I was thinking about, especially 10 days or so ago, though, was this question about community. What can create community? What can build and sustain community, especially in a world of mobility and individualism and everything else that seems to work in the other direction? Olmsted, I think, understood that empathy was key to that hope of community building. And what he hoped for then is, I think, still true. In many cities, including Buffalo, the park is the place where you are most likely to see people different from yourself, and see them at their freest. And that word I don't choose just out of the blue. Olmsted himself spoke about one of his earliest parks in Brooklyn, which was he was creating at the same time he was working in Buffalo, as something that would give people an enlarged sense of freedom. And what I mean by that is, when you see people in the park, they're not in the uniform of a job. They're not in line as a customer. They're being themselves. And I think that is part of what many people afterward, and this is a phrase from a park commissioner in New York City, have talked about as a nurturing of social democracy, a sense that we are all part of a larger community. And it's one where community institutions, public institutions, parks, libraries, museums are all critical to that sense of community. Olmsted really deeply believed that. I think too, every time I go to the park, how amazing it is that it's now 150 years after Olmsted was working to create Delaware Park, and the park is still profoundly meaningful. And it's changed quite a bit. All of Olmsted's parks in Buffalo and around the country have had some changes, in some cases great changes. In many cases, they've also been restored beautifully by conservancies like our Buffalo Olmsted Park Conservancy. But Olmsted thought all the time about what he called distant effects. He was keenly interested in what things would be like far into the future, making sure that people today met the needs of people far into the future. He wanted his work to last, and it has. Most of his landscapes continued to meet important needs. And I think we don't realize just how remarkable an achievement that is. We don't appreciate it enough. I mean, our whole economy thrives on creative destruction. Hardly anything endures in our world for 50 years, let alone for 150. And again, I think it's no accident that Olmsted parks still are so meaningful. And it speaks to a less obvious legacy of Olmsted's, one that's especially important to me. And here I'm just going to read the conclusion of my Audible series, the last part of lecture 6. Olmsted devoted much of his life to the issue of sustainability, although he never used that word. And he can be an inspiration as we struggle to meet the great challenges of our time. He wasn't just interested in the sustainability of satisfying landscapes. He cared about the sustainability of communities, political institutions, and economies. That may sound too abstract. In the mid-19th century, Olmsted understood that the future of the nation was imperiled by two overwhelming problems. The first was the bitter division about slavery. The second was the explosive growth of cities. And both of those problems, I think, have modern analogs. No one issue now has the salience that slavery did, but the United States is divided in ways that threaten to tear the nation apart. That's most obvious in politics, but our political hostilities come from deepening economic, cultural, and social divisions. The second analog is climate change. Like urban growth in the 19th century, climate change is unprecedented. It's partly an environmental issue, but it's also a social issue, an economic issue, a political issue, and a moral issue. And the complexity of the climate change problem often seems beyond daunting. Olmsted was never daunted. He threw himself at challenge after challenge. He didn't always succeed, but his resolve makes me marvel. And that was partly what I was hoping to feel back 10 days ago. And I marvel even more at the breadth of Olmsted's vision. He understood that the great problems of his time were multifaceted. The way forward required fresh thinking about many subjects, including governance, political economy, and social relations. Though some of his ideas inevitably are dated, his breadth still seems an incredible model. And of course, no one can consider all the requisites of sustainability. Even Olmsted, amazing Olmsted, a man of so much energy, eventually focused on one field, landscape architecture. But he never lost sight of the prize. A sustainable civilization, he thought, was built on communities that are healthy, prosperous, cohesive, well-run, aesthetically pleasing, emotionally fulfilling, and resilient. And that's even more true today. Thank you so much.
Well, Mark, thank you so much. That was a great summary. Perfect timing, I guess, for the right reasons and sadly for, well, the world intersecting. I could relate to you. I went to Delaware Park myself, went to Siegel Landing on Sunday and just pondered many of the same things you did. Interesting. So how long have you been intrigued with Olmsted? Was this right from the beginning, way back when, or is this an evolution on your part to see the importance of community development as an architect, as in your own field? Explain that connection.
I've been interested in Olmsted maybe for 15, 17 years. And I've thought at several points of writing a book about him. And I spent quite a few months about 15 years ago thinking about that. And that's really when I began to notice how many of his ideas really were about what we would now call sustainable community. I knew of him initially as someone who was incredibly important in the late 19th century, in the beginnings of our effort to do better in relating to the environment. But I also understood that he was hugely important in almost every part of American history of his time. And as I said, I really began to notice when I dug into him more deeply that he had much to say to us about sustainable community. And I gave talks about that, and I eventually wrote an essay about it that came out just as I moved to Buffalo. But moving to Buffalo really reinvigorated my interest in Olmsted because I live near his parks. There's so much of what I enjoy about the city. This is my favorite city to live in of all that I have lived in as an academic. And he's a big part of that.
Very good. All right, Leah, let's see how we're doing for questions from the audience.
We have one question so far. What are your thoughts on the 198 Expressway and Humboldt Parkway?
You know, I should have anticipated getting a question about that, but I didn't really. I have complicated views about that. Of course, I would love if the two parts of Delaware Park were not divided by the highway, if they were as they originally were. But I also, both for practical reasons and intellectual reasons, I'm not as certain that doing away with the parkway entirely that going back to the 19th century makes sense. I mean, I use the Parkway all the time. It's how I go to campus at University at Buffalo. And I want to see the plans that they come up with. They could certainly, you know, it'd be the most expensive option, put it underneath, and that would be wonderful. That wouldn't in any way interfere with the neighborhoods around the park. I'd love to see the river itself, the creek, to be more beautiful and more important in our community life than it is. But, you know, the other thing that I think that some people think is heretical is you know, in the 19th century, Olmsted's idea of a park was that you should enter it and forget that you're in a city. That was especially obvious in Central Park, the first park that he designed. The whole exterior of the park was bordered in trees that blocked out your vision of any buildings. And there were walls, and the gates were the only entrance. And once you were inside, you were supposed to think of yourself as being in nature with a capital N. That was fine. That was an incredibly inspiring idea in the 19th century. But in our time, I don't think it's actually helpful to feel in a city that you are not part of nature. I think we need to feel every moment of our lives, whether we're in a city or out in the countryside, that we're part of something bigger than us, a larger community of nature. So intellectually, at least, I don't mind being reminded when I'm in Delaware Park that I'm in the middle of a big city. You know, again, I can imagine doing things to make the park more satisfying that involve changing the highway, but I'm not as dogmatic about thinking that we need, you know, nothing else matters except going back to this 19th century vision of Olmsted's, as some of my neighbors are.
Very good. Leah, go ahead if you have another, but would you, I see Mark Wensler will be the moderator on Buffalo Days, and could you open his audio so he can speak? I'll ask him to comment as well, but go ahead.
I'm sorry, who?
Mark Wensler. There he is. He just raised his hand there.
Yeah, hey there. Thanks, Dennis and Adam. That was great. And for those of you who are local and can come to Chautauqua Day on July 5th, we're really excited to have Adam come and speak as part of our Heritage Lecture Series on Buffalo Day, joined by his colleague Bob Shipley, and as well as Stephanie Crockett, head of Buffalo Olmsted Conservancy. And Adam, you talked about you know, climate, resilience, sustainability, and we're going to really get into those themes on July 5th. So just wanted to put a plug in for that. I'm so excited for that conversation. We also have Sally Jewell, a former U.S. Secretary of the Interior, coming that day. Orrin Lyons of the Onondaga Nation. So it's going to be a great day. Hope you all can make it. And Adam, I'm looking forward to more conversation with you on this topic.
Fantastic. I am looking forward to it too.
Yep.
And, you know, I was just thinking, Olmsted, you know, it's July 5th. It's the day after Independence Day. And July 5th in Olmsted's time, I mean, July 4th in Olmsted's time was a serious holiday. You know, people really were still thinking about independence and the great experiment of the American Republic. And Olmsted was a deep patriot. He thought all the time about what it would take to make the Republic, the United States, truly great. And so it's going to be wonderful, not only to be with such a great group of people, but to be doing it right at that time of year, talking about Olmsted and Buffalo's future and the nation's future.
Well, and it should be mentioned, and Mark, maybe get on one more time if you could, because it's Buffalo Day is within the context of week 2's theme at Chautauqua. So that starts with Sunday and goes right through the week. And that theme will be exploring this idea of people and nature.
That's right. That week 2, thanks, Dennis, is on our whole week on nature. And, you know, so lots of themes to explore. And, you know, I think that it's really also our contribution to the 200th anniversary of Frederick Law Olmsted, right? Like this, we're specifically having this lecture as part of that. And we will have, I think, some of the Olmsted 200 folks on the grounds that week as well, and some other Olmsted related types of things happening. So great week to be at Chautauqua. Thanks.
Good, good. All right, Leah, I'm getting back to any other questions?
Yes, we do have a few questions.
Good.
The first is it starts with the comments. They say this was a very interesting presentation. Thank you for explaining that our parks are more than just green spaces. Hearing about Olmsted's vision was enlightening. How can we encourage our communities to take care of the parks so they are sustained for future generations?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And let's start by being grateful to the Conservancy that they have raised a lot of money and done a lot of work in order to not only help maintain the parks, but to improve them, to restore parts of them. And that's not just true in Buffalo. That's been true around the country, that a lot of the parks that Olmsted designed or co-designed have been helped by conservancies. But I don't have a specific answer of what we can do. I mean, I think once you get into the park, that's the key, is getting people into the park, and then the park speaks for itself. The parks are wonderful, and they're quite different. That was one of the fun things for me when I first moved to Buffalo, was to go around to all the different Olmsted parks, and even the things that Olmsted would have hated. You know, he never would have wanted to see people playing golf in one of his parks. For that matter, he wouldn't have wanted to see the Albright Knox at the border of one of his parks. But all the parks have amazing qualities, and I think whatever we can do to get people to explore them will make lovers and supporters out of many.
Could you speak about the sustainability of the bridge pictured in the background of your presentation?
So it's the bridge, obviously, at Hoyt Lake, and I should know, Frank Kowski, a former emeritus professor at Buffalo State, has written a fantastic book. I highly recommend it to anybody that wants to know more about how all the Buffalo parks came to be, how they've changed over time. I think it's called The Best Planned City in the World, which was a phrase of Olmsted's. So I'm assuming that the bridge is original, which means it was designed by Calvert Vaux. But I might be wrong. You know, when I first came to Buffalo, you know, on Lincoln Parkway, one of my favorite views in the city is just all the trees down Lincoln Parkway. And I thought, oh, this is so amazing. You know, those trees were planted 150 years ago and they're still there, except that's wrong. They were all elms and they were destroyed by elm disease and they've been replanted. So I hesitate to say anything about the bridge, but that's part of what I think is amazing about the parks, is that they've evolved, and Olmsted knew that they would have to, that they would end up serving many more people, and that they might also serve purposes that he didn't originally envision. And so they are a model of sustainability. Sustainability doesn't mean keeping things unchanged. It means adapting to changing circumstances in creative, imaginative ways. And I think the people of Buffalo have done that with their parks. They're not perfect. They're not what Olmsted designed, but they're still amazing, and they can continue to be as long as we take care of them.
There's one more question. Do you really believe that covering the 33 would have any effect to rejoin the East Side community after having destroyed the Humboldt Parkway?
That's a different question. And the East Side community and Humboldt, I mean, that's clearly something that we need to do. And I'm thrilled that there's now going to be a lot of money from the state, and I guess the federal government as well, and a lot of political will to redo it. I don't know that it can ever be as beautiful and as satisfying to the people who live there as what it was, But that is a much simpler decision for me. I'm all in favor of that, and I hope that it is as lives up to the potential that people are, the dreams that people have, that it might heal some of the wounds in that community.
Great. Those are all the questions.
Good. You know, the Albright Knox and the History Museum, they harken back to classic architecture, ideals, beauty, truth, goodness, those ideas that, in my estimation, Olmsted was pointing to, so that the very parks themselves help us explore those ancient aesthetic values: beauty, truth, goodness, justice. Wherever that leads us, the park is, maybe that's the reason you and I both ended up going there on the 15th of the month, just to be in the midst of it and see where that takes us, I guess, in our thoughts. The first question about changing the culture, it starts with engaging in the parks. I mean, it's up to everybody to support them, to be creative with them, to appreciate them, as you said, Adam. Starts with appreciation. So that's the way I'm going to do it. You know, let's see, I saw JD on, but I think, all right, he's not there now. I was going to have him introduce next week's guest. But thank you for being part of this and in anticipation of July 5th. Thank you for saying yes to Buffalo Day at Chautauqua. Folks, that is Tuesday, July 5th. First time that everybody from the greater Buffalo area will be free for the day. That's the morning amphitheater program. That's the afternoon. That's the evening. All day long, free for those who live in the Buffalo zip codes from 14201 through 14280. So if you haven't been there recently, I know you're going to enjoy the evolution itself of Chautauqua, the newer amphitheater, the grounds that go back almost 150 years, 1874. So join us that day, and you'll be hopefully surrounded by a lot of fellow Buffalonians, if you would. So thanks for joining us today. We hope to see you back here again next Tuesday. I'm going to be out of town, but JD Hartman will be hosting our 5th Tuesday of the month, Art of Investing, and it'll be about sustainability and the art of investing. And he'll be interviewing his guest, a fellow member of the Western New York Sustainable Business Roundtable, and that's Neera Jory, who is involved with sustainability at Rich Products right here in town. So join us if you can, mention it to others. Make sure you share this video, go to the YouTube channel, the Buffalo Library YouTube. Just put that in your search engine and you'll get all of these programs and this week's as well. So I'm Dennis Galucki. Have a good day and be well.